Ryan, among President Trump's first words, deeply disappointing. Talk to us about his reaction in the room and what you asked him about.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways to look at this, Clay. First, how emphatic he was hammering the Supreme Court in a very direct and sometimes personal way, going after a group of Supreme Court justices that he appointed, saying at one point that their families should be ashamed over this decision. He stopped short of saying that he regretted appointing them to the Supreme Court. But I do think that we need to put that into context. It is not common for a president of the United States to be so personally critical of a Supreme Court justice or a group of Supreme Court justices after a ruling. And that was at least part of the message that the president was trying to make here today in the briefing room. But then to your second point about the other avenues he has to employ tariffs. Obviously, there are these other provisions within the law that Laura outlined that they're going to try to attack. That seems to be his first and probably most reliable path forward. But the open question here is that the way that tariffs have been instituted almost since the founding of this country, and the way to do it in the most foolproof legal way is by getting Congress to write and pass a law. And President Trump has just, for whatever reason, decided that is not the route he wants to go, in part, and the question that I was asking is because there are a lot of Republicans in Congress that don't believe that this is good policy and that they believe that it could hurt the average American consumer, and they are already hurting the average American consumer. So the problem that President Trump has here is that if he were to go the most foolproof legal way of implementing tariffs that would last and wouldn't be subject to the kind of court dealings that he's been forced to face, would be to get Congress to pass a law. But he simply just doesn't have the votes. And it's not that he doesn't have 60 votes in the Senate, which would require Democratic support. He doesn't even have enough Republican support in Congress to get this over the finish line. And while he kind of tangled with me with a number of Republicans that have voted for it, 215 votes just isn't enough to get something passed in the House of Representatives, regardless if it's 215 out of 218 Republicans. You need all 218. And so that's why he's just going to continue to try and find these other novel ways to utilize the law to his benefit to try and implement those tariffs. But at every stage of the way, that is going to lead to court challenges, and it's going to lead to headaches, and it's not going to be easy. The most direct route is through Congress, and that's just not something he's interested in right now.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.